Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel this elegant puzzle together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Let's get started. It was one of those crisp autumn afternoons in London, the sort that invites a gentleman to indulge in the pleasures of a well-laid tea table. Hercule Poirot and I, Captain Hastings, had taken refuge at Claridge's, a place that my fastidious friend held in high regard for its elegant service and, more importantly, its properly symmetrical table settings. The tea had just been served, and I was already halfway through a delicate cucumber sandwich when Poirot's voice interrupted my satisfaction. "My dear Hastings," said Poirot, eyes twinkling with quiet disapproval, "you eat with the enthusiasm of a man scaling Everest, but with none of the reverence required for so delicate an affair as afternoon tea." I grinned. "It's just tea, Poirot. A few sandwiches, a scone or two. What's the harm in enjoying it without ceremony?" Poirot sighed, adjusting his napkin with precise care. "You are English to your bones, mon ami. You do not understand. A tea service must be a composition, balanced, harmonious, a study in symmetry." He gestured at the table. "Observe, the cups aligned, the spoons equidistant, the teapot at the exact centre. It is artistry, Hastings." I was about to reply, something flippant, no doubt, when his voice grew sterner. "And yet," he added, his finger tracing the edge of his saucer, "there is always danger when beauty is disturbed. Even the smallest irregularity, it draws the eye." "Really, Poirot, you make it sound as though an improperly placed sugar lump might spark a revolution." Poirot leaned back, steepling his fingers. "No, Hastings," he said softly, "not a revolution, a tragedy." I was still puzzling over this when fate intervened, and a teacup shattered behind us with a startling crash. The sound rang out through the hushed elegance of the Claridge's tea room, silencing every conversation mid-sentence. A waiter, his face pale with embarrassment, stood frozen, a tray at his feet and shards of porcelain glinting in the sunlight. The cup, a delicate piece of bone china with a gilt edge, lay in ruin. The sight might have meant nothing to anyone else, but Poirot sat up straighter, his gaze narrowing with hawk-like intensity. "Curious," he murmured, rising from his chair. "Very curious." "It's just an accident," I said, trying to reassure the trembling waiter. "These things happen." Poirot ignored me entirely. He crouched beside the broken cup, studying the fragments as though they were ancient relics uncovered in an archaeological dig. "Note the angle of the break," he muttered to himself. "See how the handle detached cleanly, as if severed with intention. The cup fell, yes, but was it merely a fall?" I rolled my eyes. "Poirot, you can't possibly believe this is anything but clumsiness." "Clumsiness, perhaps," he said, rising. "Or the work of fate, nudging the hand at precisely the right moment." I was preparing to argue this latest bit of whimsy when, from across the room, a figure approached, tall, elegant, and trembling like a leaf in a storm, Lady Constance Enderby. Her gloved hands twisted together, her face pale beneath her hat's veil. Poirot's expression changed instantly, from curiosity to something approaching sympathy. "Ah," he said softly, "the drama unfolds." I knew better than to ask what he meant. Experience had taught me that when Poirot sensed a story, it would unravel itself in due course, and rarely in the way one expected. Lady Constance sank into the chair opposite Poirot, her hands still trembling, her breathing unsteady. It was clear that the shattered cup had affected her far more than it should have. "Madame," Poirot said gently, "it is only a teacup. Unless—" She exhaled shakily. "Unless it's not," she whispered. "Monsieur Poirot, you must help me. I have received letters." "Letters, madame?" Poirot's brow arched slightly, though he remained the picture of polite detachment. "3, to be exact." She fumbled in her handbag, withdrawing a bundle of papers. The handwriting was neat but oddly slanted, and each letter was brief. The first read, the cup will break. Beware the past. The second, the cup is already broken. Beware what lies within. And the third, received only that morning. The final cup breaks today. Poirot took them from her with great care, reading each in silence. Mon Dieu, he murmured. This is not a warning, madame. It is a sentence. But why? I asked, perplexed. Why on earth would anyone threaten you through teacups? Lady Constance clasped her hands together as though to steady them. My husband, Lord Enderby, died 10 years ago, at this very hotel, during afternoon tea. Ah! Poirot's eyes sharpened. And did his cup break? She nodded. It slipped from his hand as he... She swallowed hard. As he died. There was a heavy silence, broken only by the rustle of her gloves against her lap. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but commanding. Madame, who knew about this? Who was present that day? Only the family. Reginald, my stepson. Miss Prattle, my companion. Dr. Greaves, our physician. And Captain Havers, an old friend of my husband's. Poirot exchanged a quick glance with me. And the letters, are they signed? No signature. Only that terrible message. Poirot folded the papers neatly. Lady Constance, he said gravely, fear not. Hercule Poirot is at your service. But what does it mean, Poirot? I asked, still lost in the maze. He tapped his finger against his cup. It means, mon ami, that some ghosts do not rest quietly, and that this afternoon tea, this innocent ceremony, may yet unmask a murderer. Lady Constance shivered. You believe my husband was murdered? Poirot's smile was faint. Let us not rush, madame, but I believe the truth, like tea leaves, often settles at the bottom of the cup. Lady Constance's gloved hands trembled slightly as she raised her cup of tea to her lips, though I noticed she barely took a sip. Her gaze drifted toward the window, as though searching the grey London sky for courage before she spoke. It was 10 years ago today, she began softly. My husband, Lord Enderby, was not a man prone to dramatics. He was practical, a man of business. She paused, her fingers tightening around her teaspoon. We had come to Claridge's for tea, a small indulgence. It was a habit of ours in those days, a little ritual after a successful deal or a favourable investment. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. A charming custom, madame, and on that day was the tea unusually memorable. Her breath caught. Memorable, Monsieur Poirot? It was catastrophic. I leaned forward, caught by her tone. What happened? We were seated right over there, she said, gesturing toward a corner table by the window. We had barely begun. The tea had been poured, the scones served. My husband lifted his cup, took a single sip, and then, she faltered. Poirot's voice filled the silence. Then the cup fell from his hand and shattered. We? She nodded. He slumped forward, lifeless, before the cup hit the floor. A chill crept along my spine, but Poirot only frowned in thought. And what did the doctors say? Heart failure, she whispered. Sudden, unexplained. But now these letters, the broken cups, they seem to say otherwise. Poirot placed his hand over hers briefly, a rare gesture of comfort. Madame, Hercule Poirot does not believe in ghosts, but the past. It has a way of returning to those who leave its secrets untended. We left Claridge's some time later. Lady Constance bundled into her waiting motor car, her nerves still frayed. Poirot, however, was in a state I had come to recognise, part amusement, part irritation, and wholly intrigued. Well, Poirot, I asked, matching his brisk pace down the pavement. What do you make of it all? Surely you cannot believe these letters are anything but a cruel prank. He paused abruptly, causing me to nearly collide with him. His eyes narrowed, and he raised a finger. Mon ami, you think, but you do not observe. There is no prankster here. No mischievous handwriting letters for sport. No, This is the work of someone who plans, someone who waits. Waits? For what? For the past to settle its debt, he said, with an almost theatrical sweep of his hand. I was about to press for more when he smiled, one of those maddening, knowing smiles of his. Fear not, Hastings. All shall become clear. In time, even the smallest crack in a teacup can reveal the whole truth. And until then, I asked, until then, mon ami, we shall visit Enderby Manor, and we shall have tea. It was a long drive to Enderby Manor, a house which, even by English standards, seemed to wear its history like a heavy coat. The gravel drive crackled beneath the wheels of our hired car, and the great house emerged from the morning mist like a portrait painted in sepia tones. Grand, yes, but with an unmistakable air of decline. Charming, I said, though my tone lacked conviction. Ah! Poirot clasped his hands together as he stepped out, surveying the manor with the enthusiasm of a man admiring a well-combed moustache. Observe, Hastings, a house is like a person. It has moods, secrets, and a memory that lingers in the walls. I expect the pipes rattle too, I muttered. We were received at the door by a solemn-looking butler, who, after a moment's hesitation, led us to the drawing-room. The interior was much like the exterior, elegant but fading. The wallpaper curled at the edges, the carpet was threadbare in places, and the air held the faint scent of lavender and something less pleasant beneath. Lady Constance stood by the fireplace, her back ramrod straight, as though the house itself relied on her posture to remain upright. She welcomed us politely, though her smile was forced, and her eyes darted nervously toward the door, as if expecting someone or something to enter uninvited. As Poirot made the necessary courtesies, I noticed a collection of photographs displayed on the mantelpiece. Lord Enderby stared out from one of them, a broad-faced man with a confident expression. Beside him stood Reginald, his son from a previous marriage, looking rather more sour. Lady Constance, Poirot said, we are most grateful for your hospitality, and I assure you we shall not leave until the truth, like cream in the milk, has risen to the surface. Lady Constance's hands gripped each other tightly. You are very kind, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot gave his little bow, but I saw that his eyes were already scanning the room, missing nothing. That was Poirot, charming, polite, and utterly relentless. The drawing-room was as one might expect in a house of this kind, a large bay window overlooking the lawn, heavy velvet curtains, and an assortment of heirlooms displayed with pride and a touch of desperation. But it was the tea set that caught Poirot's attention. Displayed on a side table was a porcelain tea service of exceptional craftsmanship. Each cup bore the Enderby crest, finely painted in gold. There were 11 cups in total. Curious, murmured Poirot, hands clasped behind his back as he studied the set. What is? I asked, peering at the display. It's just a tea set. Poirot shook his head. Non, Hastings. It is a set meant for 12. I frowned. Perhaps one was broken. Perhaps, Poirot said quietly. Or perhaps, Hastings, the missing cup is far more important than you imagine. Lady Constance, who had been hovering near the door, stepped forward. It was broken. The day my husband died. It was his cup. Poirot's eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. Ah, he said softly. The cup that fell. I felt a chill at the back of my neck. There was something uncomfortably theatrical about it all. The missing cup, the warning letters. It was the sort of thing that would make a splendid plot in a novel, but here, in this dimly lit room, it was altogether too real. Poirot's fingers traced the rim of one of the surviving cups. Tell me, madame, he said, did anyone know you kept this set displayed here? Lady Constance hesitated. Everyone in the household, I suppose. Poirot nodded, smiling faintly. Then we shall speak to them all. After all, Hastings, what is a teacup, if not a vessel for secrets? Reginald Enderby arrived within minutes of our request to see him, and I was struck at once by the contrast between him and his late father. Where Lord Enderby's portrait showed a man at ease with himself, Reginald seemed a collection of sharp angles, narrow face, tense shoulders, a perpetual scowl lurking just behind his expression. "You've come to stir up the past, I suppose," he said without preamble. "Mother's always been prone to dramatics." "She is not your mother," Poirot said mildly. "She is your stepmother, yes?" Reginald's lips thinned. A fact I was never allowed to forget. Poirot settled into a chair, his hands steepled. "Tell me, monsieur, did you resent her?" "What do you think?" Reginald snapped. "My father marries a woman younger than I am, rewrites his will in her favour, and then conveniently drops dead over his tea." Hastings and I exchanged glances, but Poirot's expression did not change. "And yet," Poirot said, "you did not contest the will." "Because I knew I'd lose," Reginald said bitterly. "The old man was besotted with her. If you ask me, he died of sheer stupidity." "Were you here the day he died?" Poirot's voice was soft, but his eyes were sharp. Reginald hesitated. "I was in the garden," he said finally. Poirot nodded. "And afterward? You remained at Enderby Manor?" "For a time." His voice grew defensive. "Until it became clear I was no longer welcome." Poirot smiled faintly. "Monsieur, you have been most frank. One final question. Do you believe your stepmother is in danger now?" Reginald's expression darkened. "If she is, it's her own fault. Marrying a man for his money tends to make enemies." Poirot stood. "Merci, monsieur. And remember, bitterness, like strong tea, grows darker the longer it steeps." As Reginald left the room, I shook my head. "He's not exactly grieving, is he?" "No," said Poirot, "but that does not make him guilty. Bitterness clouds the heart, mon ami, but guilt clouds the mind. Let us see which of these we are dealing with." Miss Edith Prattle was the sort of woman who might have stepped straight out of a handbook on respectable English spinsterhood. Thin-lipped, with iron grey hair scraped into a severe bun, she wore her duty like an overstarched apron. Poirot received her with his customary politeness, bowing slightly before inviting her to sit opposite him. Miss Prattle perched on the edge of the chair, hands clasped, spine rigid. "I am at your service, Monsieur Poirot," she said primly, her voice sharp with the confidence of one who believes herself indispensable. Poirot inclined his head. "You have been companion to Lady Constance for how long, mademoiselle?" 17 years, she said proudly. "I was with her before her marriage to Lord Enderby. I stayed after his death." "And you remained because of devotion, yes?" "Of course," she said, a little too quickly. "Lady Constance has been very generous. I would do anything for her." Poirot's smile was faint. "Even encourage her to remarry?" Miss Prattle stiffened. "I beg your pardon?" "Come now, mademoiselle," Poirot said softly. "A lady companion's position is precarious, is it not? A wealthy husband for Lady Constance would secure your own future most comfortably." Her colour rose. "That is outrageous." "Is it? You see, I observe the small things. Your eagerness when you spoke of Captain Havers, your subtle hints to Lady Constance that a woman is not meant to live alone. You seek security, mademoiselle, and perhaps you fear that if the past returns to haunt your mistress, your own future becomes uncertain." Miss Prattle's hands shook. "I would never harm Lady Constance." "Of course not," said Poirot soothingly. "But what of secrets, mademoiselle? Secrets you might have kept, believing them harmless at the time." For the first time, Miss Prattle hesitated. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "You see, even the most loyal companion may unknowingly become part of a larger design." Dr. Lionel Greaves had the air of a man accustomed to other people's discomfort. Slightly portly, with thinning hair and the faint scent of camphor about him, he greeted us with professional detachment. "I assume this is about Lady Constance's letters," he said, before Poirot could speak. "Frankly, I advise her to ignore them. Superstitious nonsense." "And yet," said Poirot mildly, You were present when Lord Enderby died, were you not? The doctor shifted in his chair. Yes, it was sudden. Heart failure. Poirot's head tilted slightly. You are quite certain? Absolutely. And yet, the broken teacup, Dr. Greaves's fingers twitched. A meaningless accident. Is that so? Poirot's voice was almost tender. Doctor, I have met many men who lie out of kindness, but a lie, even one told to spare feelings, is still a lie. I don't know what you mean. Poirot leaned forward. The tea service was examined after Lord Enderby's death, yes? But only for fingerprints, not for poison. Dr. Greaves paled. There was no reason to suspect poison. No? Poirot's voice grew sharper. And yet, you knew that Lord Enderby had recently changed his will. That kind of knowledge. Ah, it makes a man look twice at a broken cup, does it not? Dr. Greaves said nothing. You are hiding something, Doctor, Poirot said softly. Not a crime, perhaps, but a truth. And Hercule Poirot will find it. Captain Jeremy Havers was waiting for us in the library, sprawled in a leather armchair with the sort of ease that only comes from belonging to the furniture. A man in his late 50s, with a weathered face and a military moustache, Havers had the air of someone who had made peace with life's disappointments, except, perhaps, one. Poirot, is it? He said, rising to shake hands. And Hastings, I presume. Heard about you both. Then you know why we are here, Poirot said pleasantly. The captain poured himself a brandy, offering none to us, and settled back down. Constance always did have a taste for theatrics, he said. These letters, just some idiot with too much time on their hands. And yet, Poirot said, you remain here, Captain. Why is that? Havers shrugged. Old habit. Loved her once, you know. Still do, in a way. Even after she married your friend. His jaw tightened. That was a mistake. She knew it, and so did he. Ah, Poirot's eyes glinted. You believe they were unhappy? Of course they were. He was a bore, and she needed… Well, never mind that. Yet you stayed, Poirot said softly. Even after his death. Someone had to look after her. Poirot's smile was faint. A most loyal sentiment, Captain, unless of course that loyalty is mixed with something darker. Resentment, perhaps, or regret. Havers's face darkened. What are you suggesting? Nothing, Captain, Poirot said lightly. Only this. Sometimes, when the heart cannot forget, it finds other ways to make itself heard. Hastings, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. Do you think Captain Havers wrote the letters, Poirot? Poirot shook his head. No, mon ami. Our captain is a man who speaks plainly. The author of these letters, they are more subtle, more cruel. Havers drained his glass. I suppose you'll keep digging until you find some skeleton to rattle. Well, good luck to you. Poirot's smile sharpened. Oh, mon capitaine, Hercule Poirot does not rely on luck, only on the truth. Marie Charpentier stood before us, twisting the hem of her apron between nervous fingers. A petite Frenchwoman in her 30s, her wide eyes darted about the room, never resting too long on Poirot's penetrating gaze. You were present the day Lord Enderby died, yes? Poirot asked, his voice gentle but insistent. Oui, monsieur, she whispered. I was serving the tea. And you noticed nothing unusual? Poirot's brows lifted, his head tilting just slightly to the right. Marie's lips pressed together. I saw nothing, monsieur. Ah, Poirot exclaimed softly. Mademoiselle, forgive me, but that is not true. You saw something. A small thing, perhaps. But to Hercule Poirot, the small things are everything. She shook her head, a little too vigorously. It is not my place. On the contrary, Poirot interrupted smoothly. It is precisely your place. You see, a maid observes what others dismiss. The flicker of a glance, a gesture half made, a moment of hesitation. Marie's breath quickened. It was nothing, monsieur. Only… She stopped herself, biting her lip. Only what? Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. Marie glanced toward the door, then back at Poirot. I saw Miss Prattle, monsieur. She She changed the cups. Changed the cups? I repeated, startled. She moved Lord Enderby's cup just before I served the tea, Marie admitted. I thought nothing of it, but now… Her voice trailed off, fear clouding her expression. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. And remember, what the eye sees and the heart ignores, the little grey cells never forget. The interviews left me with a pounding headache and a mind full of contradictory theories. Poirot, however, seemed invigorated, pacing the drawing room like a man piecing together a jigsaw puzzle in mid-air. That maid is hiding something, I muttered. They all are, in fact. Bien sûr, Poirot agreed cheerfully. But which is hiding guilt, and which is hiding fear? That is the question, mon ami. As we spoke, a low murmur drifted from the corridor. I stepped out to investigate and found two housemaids gossiping in hushed tones. They say Lady Constance and Dr. Greaves were once close, one whispered. Closer than they should have been, the other asked with wide eyes. Before I could question them further, Poirot's voice called me back. In his hand was a small brown bottle retrieved from the garden. Poison, he announced dramatically. Poison, I exclaimed. That's it then. Murder. Non, mon ami. Poirot shook his head. It is weed killer for the roses, a false lead. Moments later, a diary page was found torn and crumpled behind a cushion. Poirot smoothed it out, but its contents proved disappointing, only a fragment of bad poetry. Another dead end, I grumbled. Patience, Hastings, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. The truth, she is like the sun, hidden behind clouds perhaps, but always there. That evening, Lady Constance summoned us to her sitting room, her face pale as parchment. In her hand, she held a folded slip of paper, her fingers trembling violently. It came under the door just now, she whispered, handing it to Poirot. The paper was cheap, the ink blotched, but the message was clear. Tomorrow at tea, the truth will be served. Poirot read it aloud, his voice calm, but his expression grave. The handwriting, similar to the previous letters, but hurried. Lady Constance's hand flew to her throat. I cannot bear it. What does it mean? Poirot patted her hand gently. It means, madame, that the writer believes their performance reaches its climax tomorrow. But surely, I protested, that's nothing more than melodrama. Perhaps, Poirot said. Or perhaps, mon ami, it is the announcement of a reckoning long overdue. Lady Constance slumped into her chair, and I found myself wondering whether the strain would finish her off before the truth even arrived. Later that night, a commotion erupted in the drawing room. I arrived to find the housemaid wringing her hands, the butler looking thoroughly flustered, and Poirot standing over an empty space where the Enderby tea set had once been displayed. Gone, the butler declared. The entire set. Every cup? Poirot asked softly. Yes, monsieur. Every single piece. Poirot's eyes narrowed, and his fingers tapped his chin thoughtfully. Curious. The removal of the relics of the past. How symbolic. But who would steal a tea set? I asked. It's hardly worth a fortune. Precisely why this is no ordinary theft, Poirot said. This is not the work of a thief, Hastings. This is the work of someone who wishes to erase history itself. The housemaid sniffled. But why would anyone care about an old tea set? Poirot turned, his gaze sharp as a razor. Because, mademoiselle, it is not the tea set they fear. It is the story it tells. We retired for the night, but I could not sleep. In my mind, the cups clinked and shattered, over and over, like an ominous refrain from a song no one wanted to hear. Reginald Enderby stood by the window when Poirot and I found him, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the sloping lawn with an expression of distinct dissatisfaction. He did not turn as we entered, his gaze fixed on the distant hedgerows. Poirot, ever the master of civility, offered his usual bow. Monsieur Enderby, It is most kind of you to grant us a few moments. Reginald gave a curt nod, but did not move from his place. Let's get this over with, shall we? Poirot, unoffended, lowered himself into an armchair and folded his hands neatly in his lap. On the day your father passed, monsieur, you were where? In the garden, Reginald replied promptly. I was pruning the rose bushes. I wasn't even in the house when it happened. Poirot's eyebrows rose ever so slightly. A devoted gardener, are you, monsieur? Reginald snorted. Hardly. I was out there to avoid the blasted tea. My father insisted on playing Lord of the Manor, dragging us all in for family tea as though we were some happy little clan. We weren't. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. And the gardener, Monsieur Flynn? He would have seen you, of course. Flynn was there, Reginald said, turning at last. Ask him. We did, Poirot said mildly. He remembers seeing you that day, but not during the fatal hour. According to him, you returned to the house shortly before the tea was served. Reginald's brow darkened. That's absurd. I was outside the whole time. Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the armrest. Curious. Memory, monsieur, it is a most fragile thing, especially when it strains under the weight of guilt. I've nothing to feel guilty about, Reginald snapped. Poirot's smile was faint. Perhaps not. But you see, mon cher Hastings and I, we are most interested in this broken teacup. And you, monsieur, you seem very keen to forget all about it. Reginald's eyes flickered, just for a moment. But for Poirot, that was quite enough. Miss Edith Prattle awaited us in the morning room, perched in a chair that seemed almost too large for her thin frame. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, her posture straight enough to suggest either great discipline or considerable tension. Poirot, ever gracious, greeted her warmly. Mademoiselle Prattle, thank you for your time. Lady Constance is fortunate indeed to have such a devoted companion. Miss Prattle inclined her head stiffly. Lady Constance's well-being is my chief concern, Monsieur Poirot. Of course. Poirot settled opposite her, smoothing an invisible crease in his sleeve. On the afternoon of Lord Enderby's death, mademoiselle, you assisted with the tea service, did you not? She hesitated for the briefest moment. No, Monsieur Poirot. I never touched the service. Never? Poirot's brows lifted slightly. Never, she repeated. Poirot smiled faintly and reached into his pocket, producing a small envelope. From it, he withdrew a thin sheet of paper and placed it on the table before her. I have here the original fingerprint analysis taken from the tea set after Lord Enderby's passing. Imagine my surprise to find your fingerprints, mademoiselle, on the sugar bowl. Miss Prattle paled, her hands clasping each other even tighter. There must be some mistake. Poirot does not make mistakes in matters of fingerprints, mademoiselle. He leaned forward slightly. Why did you touch the service? I was only straightening it, she stammered. It looked untidy. Untidy, Poirot repeated softly. The sugar bowl, out of place. She swallowed hard. I swear I meant nothing by it. Poirot's gaze was sharp. And yet, mademoiselle, your loyalty is so fierce. Could it be that you saw something that day, something that threatened Lady Constance, and so you acted to protect her? I saw nothing. Non, Poirot said, rising. You saw everything, and one day soon, mademoiselle, you shall remember. Dr. Lionel Greaves received us in his consulting room, where the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and pipe smoke. He rose as we entered, his smile strained at the edges. Poirot, he said, shaking hands. I rather expected you'd come. Indeed, Doctor, Poirot replied. You were present, I believe, when Lord Enderby died. I was summoned immediately after, Greaves corrected. Lady Constance was hysterical. And you concluded the cause of death was heart failure? Poirot's tone was mild, but his eyes missed nothing. There was no reason to think otherwise, Greaves said defensively. Lord Enderby was overweight, fond of rich food, and prone to stress. Poirot steepled his fingers. But the teacup, Doctor. The broken teacup. A meaningless accident, Greaves said firmly. People drop things. And yet, Poirot's voice softened, the servant who cleared the tray remembers something peculiar, that the cup was already cracked when the tea was poured. Greaves shifted in his seat. I don't see the relevance. Poirot's eyes gleamed. On the contrary, Doctor, the relevance is most profound. A cracked cup, one pre-damage before it was used, suggests not accident, but intent. Intent? Greaves paled slightly. I mean, Doctor, that someone prepared for Lord Enderby's final cup of tea with extraordinary care. Poirot's voice was silken. And you, who examined the body, must surely have noticed poison leaves traces, n'est-ce pas? Greaves's hand twitched toward his pipe. There was no poison. Poirot's smile was faint. That, Doctor, is what you told Lady Constance. But what did you tell yourself? There was a long silence. You have no proof, Greaves muttered. No, Poirot agreed. Not yet. But the truth, Doctor, it is like the crack in that cup. Invisible at first, until the pressure becomes too great. And then, he spread his hands wide, the truth shatters. Captain Jeremy Havers stood by the unlit fireplace, his stance deceptively casual, hands tucked behind his back. There was something in the set of his shoulders, a stiffness that spoke of restraint, of words swallowed rather than spoken. Poirot began gently, almost conversationally. You have known Lady Constance for many years, n'est-ce pas? Havers nodded, staring into the empty grate. Long before Enderby married her. And you admired her, Poirot continued. Perhaps even you hoped to marry her yourself? Havers' jaw tightened. What of it? Poirot's hands fluttered briefly. It is a most natural sentiment, and yet you remained a loyal friend to her husband. I owed him that much, Havers said gruffly. He wasn't a bad sort, Enderby, but he never understood her. Where were you, Captain, on the day of his death? In the library, reading. His voice was flat, but there was a slight catch in it. Poirot inclined his head. And after the tragedy, you stayed close to Lady Constance. She needed someone. Indeed, Poirot murmured. And when a man loves, Captain, does it not cloud his memory? Might he perhaps forget inconvenient moments, such as who served the fatal cup of tea? Havers turned sharply. What are you suggesting? Nothing, Captain, Poirot said smoothly. I merely observe that sometimes the heart sees only what it wishes to see. Marie Charpentier stood in the doorway, like a woman trapped between two fears, one behind her and one before. Her hands twisted the edge of her apron until Poirot gently bade her sit. Marie, Poirot said softly, you were there, oui? You served the tea on the day Lord Enderby died. She nodded, her lips trembling. And you saw something, mademoiselle. Something small, perhaps, but significant. No, monsieur, she whispered. I saw nothing. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Mademoiselle, the truth. She is like steam from a teapot. She cannot be contained forever. Tears welled in Marie's eyes. I saw, Miss Prattle, she whispered. I saw nothing. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Mademoiselle, the truth. She is like steam from a teapot. She cannot be contained forever. Tears welled in Marie's eyes. I saw, Miss Prattle, she whispered. She switched the cups. Hastings gave a startled exclamation, but Poirot held up a hand. You are certain? Marie nodded miserably. I did not understand why. I thought perhaps she wished Lady Constance to have the prettier cup. Poirot's expression grew very still. And you told no one? I was afraid. Miss Prattle, she rules the household. Poirot's voice was gentle. Merci, mademoiselle. You have served the truth at last. Marie fled the room, and I turned to Poirot, bewildered. What does it mean, Poirot? Patience, Hastings, Poirot said, his eyes shining. The truth, she begins to whistle, like a kettle just before the boil. The rest of that afternoon passed in a fog of unanswered questions and Poirot's maddening silences. I followed him from room to room, notebook in hand, while he measured, muttered, and occasionally hummed to himself in a most infuriating manner. "Poirot," I said at last, after watching him measure the distance between the teapot and Lady Constance's chair for the third time. "What exactly are you doing?" "Calculating, mon ami." "Calculating what?" "The angle," he said serenely, "and the trajectory." "Of what?" I asked, my patience rapidly dissolving. "The cup," Poirot said, as though speaking to a particularly dim schoolboy. "The way it fell." "What possible difference does that make?" Poirot looked at me with something approaching pity. "Ah, Hastings, you think only of the tea. But the cup, she is more eloquent than you imagine." I threw down my notebook in exasperation. "Poirot, we have interviewed everyone in the house. We know there are motives aplenty: jealousy, bitterness, greed. We know Miss Prattle handled the cup. We know there are these cursed letters, and now the tea set itself has disappeared. What more could you possibly need?" Poirot patted my arm as though I were a fractious child. "The order, Hastings. The order of events. To solve a crime, one must arrange the pieces in their correct sequence." He held up the tiny ruler he had been using all afternoon. "The crack in the cup, the distance it fell, the pattern of the break. It tells a story of intention, not accident." I stared at him in disbelief. "You mean to say you can tell who the murderer is by measuring broken china?" "Mais oui," Poirot said, his eyes twinkling. "Because, mon ami, a teacup does not lie." It was well past midnight, and the house had settled into uneasy silence. I had taken the liberty of pouring myself a modest brandy, hoping it might soothe my nerves after the day's events. Poirot, however, showed no sign of retiring. He stood by the mantelpiece, eyes fixed not on the fire, but on his pocket watch, which he held aloft like a man awaiting some celestial alignment. "Poirot," I said, lowering myself into an armchair, "what exactly are you waiting for?" He glanced at me briefly. "The past, Hastings." "The past?" I repeated, bewildered. He lowered the watch and tapped it gently with one finger. "Timing, mon ami. Always the timing. The broken cup, the serving of the tea, the moment Lord Enderby collapsed. It is all about the sequence. I should think the poison, if there was poison, would be the important part." "Non," Poirot said sharply. "The poison, it is the weapon, yes, but the timing, Hastings, that is the hand that wields the weapon." I sighed. "You are making this unnecessarily complicated. The man drank from a cup, the cup broke, the man died. Surely those are the only relevant facts." Poirot shook his head gravely. "It is not enough to know what happened, mon ami. One must know when it happened. Who touched the cup first? Who handled it last? When was the sugar added? And by whom?" "You can't possibly deduce all that," I said. He gave me one of those infuriating little smiles. "Can I not? Consider. Lady Constance did not pour the tea herself, did she? No, it was Marie. And yet, the cup had already been moved once before Marie served it. By whom? Miss Prattle," I said reluctantly. "Precisely." Poirot's fingers tapped a precise rhythm on the mantelpiece. "And before Miss Prattle, who handled the tray?" "The butler, I suppose." "Just so," said Poirot. "And now you begin to see. The cup passed through many hands before it reached Lord Enderby's. And somewhere in that journey, mon ami, death was added." By now, my frustration had reached boiling point. Poirot's riddles, his relentless measuring of imaginary trajectories, his constant references to the importance of timing, it was all too much. "Poirot," I said, setting down my empty glass with a little more force than I intended, "would you kindly explain what exactly you are getting at?" He turned, clasping his hands behind his back, and regarded me with an expression of almost paternal amusement. "Ah, Hastings, you are impatient." "Can you blame me?" I said. "We have a house full of suspects, a vanishing tea set, a broken cup, and now mysterious letters, promising a revelation at tomorrow's tea. If you have deduced something, for heaven's sake, share it." Poirot took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Tomorrow, mon ami, we shall witness a most remarkable tea party." "Why tomorrow?" I asked, baffled. "Because," Poirot said with a flourish, "the author of these letters has told us so. And Hercule Poirot, he never ignores an invitation." I stared at him. "You mean to say you intend to let this lunatic play out their performance?" "Mais oui," said Poirot. "For you see, Hastings, the guilty party, whoever they are, cannot resist such a stage. They will be compelled to act." "That's all very theatrical," I said. "But what if they intend harm?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Then Hercule Poirot shall be ready." I rubbed my temples. "So you know who it is?" "Not yet," Poirot admitted. "But I know this. The truth, she will present herself, if only we set the scene correctly. And what part do I play in this charming little drama?" Poirot gave me a pat on the shoulder. "You, mon ami, shall do what you do best." "What's that?" I asked suspiciously. "You shall observe very little, understand even less, and then, at the final moment, be astonished by the brilliance of Hercule Poirot." I opened my mouth to protest, but he had already turned away, humming softly to himself. "Tomorrow, mon ami," he called over his shoulder, "we shall take tea, and with it, the truth." The drawing room at Enderby Manor had been arranged with Poirot's peculiar sense of theatre. The heavy curtains were half drawn, allowing a slant of late afternoon light to cast long shadows across the carpet. A silver tea service gleamed at the centre of the table, flanked by delicate china and plates of sandwiches so precise they might have been measured with a ruler. The atmosphere, however, was anything but civilized. The suspects, for that was what they had all become, took their seats with visible reluctance. Lady Constance sat stiffly at one end of the table, her fingers twisting a handkerchief into knots. Captain Havers loitered near the mantelpiece, pouring himself a whisky instead of tea. Miss Prattle hovered in a corner, resembling a startled bird trapped indoors. Reginald slumped in a chair, his scowl aimed at the carpet, while Dr. Greaves stood apart, arms folded, jaw clenched. Poirot entered last, moving with the air of a man stepping onto a stage where every line had already been rehearsed in his mind. He gave a small bow, then gestured for everyone to sit. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "you are wondering, perhaps, why I have invited you to this little tea party." "Because you enjoy being dramatic," muttered Reginald. Poirot's smile was serene. "That too, monsieur. But more importantly, because the tea, the tea. She is at the very heart of our mystery." Hastings, beside me, shifted uncomfortably. I could sense his growing impatience, but I knew better than to interrupt Poirot in such moments. "Tea," Poirot continued, "is not merely a refreshment. It is a ritual, and today it shall also serve as our final curtain." With that, he clapped his hands once, and the tea was served. I had expected Poirot to launch into his explanation immediately, but instead, I watched in astonishment as he personally supervised the pouring of the tea. His fastidious fingers adjusted the placement of each cup and saucer, his gaze sharp as a hawk's. Then came the moment that caught my attention. At Lady Constance's seat, Poirot placed a cup unlike the others. It was subtly different, the shape slightly more rounded, the handle more delicate, and the glaze just a shade creamier. It was only noticeable if you had, like Poirot, an eye for order. "Why the odd cup, Poirot?" I whispered. "Ah, Hastings," he murmured back, "you observe at last. It is the very cup from which Lord Enderby drank his final tea." Lady Constance gasped audibly. But that cup was broken." "Indeed," said Poirot, "but broken things, they can be mended." A crack sealed, a flaw disguised. And yet the memory remains. He tapped the cup gently with his fingertip. This cup has told me more than any witness could. Miss Prattle's lips thinned to a white line. That's absurd. It's just a piece of china. Non, mademoiselle, Poirot said softly. It is a silent witness, and now it shall speak. He lifted the cup, turning it in his hand. The crack, faint but unmistakable, ran along the side, a scar that told the story of its fall all those years ago. The room was utterly silent, all eyes fixed on that humble piece of porcelain. I could not help but marvel at Poirot's flair. Only he could make a teacup feel like the smoking gun in a murder case. Poirot set the cup down carefully, then took his place at the head of the table. His gaze swept over the assembled guests, not with accusation, but with something almost like pity. Let us begin at the beginning, he said. Each of you, on the day Lord Enderby died, gave an account of your whereabouts, and each of you, I have now discovered, told a version of the truth, but not the whole truth. He turned first to Reginald. Monsieur Enderby, you claim to have been pruning roses in the garden, but the gardener remembers you returning to the house minutes before tea was served. Why? Reginald's jaw worked. I forgot my gloves, he muttered. A small thing, Poirot agreed, but it placed you within reach of the tea tray. Next, he turned to Miss Prattle. Mademoiselle, you swore you never touched the service, and yet, your fingerprints, they adorned the sugar bowl. I only adjusted it, she stammered. It was crooked. Crooked, Poirot repeated softly. Or perhaps you were ensuring that a particular cup reached a particular hand. Miss Prattle's face blanched, but Poirot was already moving on. Dr. Greaves, he said, you certified that Lord Enderby died of heart failure. But you knew better, did you not? You saw the first signs of poisoning, the discoloration around the lips, the slight convulsion of the hands. Greaves's mouth opened, then closed again. Poirot's voice sharpened. And yet, you said nothing. Why? I thought... Greaves swallowed hard. I thought it would do no good. No, doctor, you thought it would do harm to someone you wished to protect. Poirot's gaze rested briefly on Lady Constance, then shifted to Captain Havers. And you, mon capitaine? You were in the library, you say? Yes, Havers snapped. Reading. And yet, the butler recalls you entering the drawing room to fetch a newspaper, minutes before the tea was poured. Damn it all, Poirot, that proves nothing. Non, it proves that every alibi has holes, because everyone, in their own way, had a reason to fear the truth. Poirot leaned forward, his voice softer now. But only one person needed that cup to break. The room held its breath. And that person, Poirot said, shall soon reveal themselves. Poirot stood at the head of the table, the mismatched teacup held aloft like some ancient relic presented to a gathering of scholars. All eyes were upon him, though the expressions ranged from bewilderment to outright impatience. Hastings, beside me, muttered something about unnecessary theatrics, but Poirot, as ever, was unmoved by such mortal concerns. Mes amis, he began, this humble object, this small piece of porcelain, has guarded a most terrible secret for 10 long years. He placed the cup gently upon the table and clasped his hands before him. You see, it was never merely a broken cup. Non, it was a cup deliberately smashed, and with the greatest urgency. Why? Because it held proof. Proof of murder. A collective murmur ran around the table. Even Lady Constance seemed too stunned to breathe. Poirot continued. On that fateful afternoon, Lord Enderby's tea was poured, as always, from the family service. But his cup, the very one that now sits before us, had already been tampered with before the tray left the kitchen. Hastings leaned toward me. But Poirot, how could anyone have known which cup would be his? Poirot's smile was thin. That, mon ami, was arranged most cleverly. The cup was placed slightly out of alignment with the others, just enough to catch the eye of Lady Constance, who naturally passed it to her husband. A small touch of psychology. His finger traced the rim of the cup. Inside, a trace of poison had been added. Not to the tea, but already inside the cup itself, hidden beneath a layer of sugar. Lady Constance gasped. But I served him the tea myself. Exactly, Poirot said. And so the poison was delivered by your hand, ensuring no suspicion fell upon the true culprit. Captain Havers slammed his glass down. But the cup broke. It smashed when it fell. Ah, said Poirot, raising a finger. And that, mon capitaine, was no accident. The cup was dropped deliberately, to shatter the evidence, to destroy the residue of the poison. He stepped back, surveying the room. It was an act of desperation, but also of calculation. And now, 10 years later, the past has come knocking once more. Dr. Greaves cleared his throat. And the letters? What of them? Letters, said Poirot, written by someone who knew or suspected the truth, but lacked the courage to say it outright. A blackmailer, perhaps, but the murder, that belonged to one person alone. The silence in the room was almost unbearable, the air thick with expectation. Poirot's little grey cells had walked the past and present hand in hand, and soon they would reveal their final truth. Poirot turned, his eyes resting on Miss Edith Prattle. She sat rigid, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles shone white beneath the skin. Even her formidable composure, so carefully honed over years of devoted service, was beginning to crack. Miss Prattle, Poirot said softly, you have served Lady Constance with unwavering loyalty. You were her shadow, her confidant, but you were also present on the day Lord Enderby died. I was, she said, her voice thin. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And yet, you left something out when you gave your account, something very important. You see, mademoiselle, you were in love with Lord Enderby. A stunned silence followed his words, broken only by Lady Constance's sharp intake of breath. Miss Prattle's lips parted, but no sound came. Her hands trembled visibly. Yes, Poirot continued, relentless now. You who lived in the background, always observing, always hoping. You thought perhaps, after his first marriage failed, there might be a place for you in his heart. Tears welled in Miss Prattle's eyes, but Poirot gave no mercy. But then you discovered the truth, that Lord Enderby intended to reconcile with Lady Constance. A letter, perhaps, left carelessly on a desk, or a word overheard. And with that knowledge, mademoiselle, your heart became a prison of resentment. Miss Prattle shook her head violently. No, it wasn't like that. Non? Poirot's voice was gentle. And yet, who but you could have tampered with the tea set? Who but you knew precisely where Lord Enderby would sit? Who but you handled the cups before they were carried into the drawing-room? Miss Prattle's face crumpled. I only wanted him to see me, to notice me. I never meant. But you did, Poirot said, his voice firm now. In your jealous fury, you took what was meant to bring Lady Constance and her husband together, and you turned it into a weapon. Hastings shook his head in disbelief. Poirot, it's incredible. Non, Hastings, it is all too human. Poirot gave a small, almost regretful shrug. Love, mon ami, she is a most dangerous mistress when scorned. Miss Prattle buried her face in her hands. I was so lonely. He was so kind to me. And so you killed him, Poirot said softly, because kindness was not enough. The room seemed to hold its breath. Poirot turned to the others. You see, mes amis, the truth, it is rarely grand. It is most often simple and sad. He lifted the cracked cup once more. This cup, she held not only tea, but passion, jealousy, and regret. And today, at last, she has told her story. Poirot's eyes glimmered as he turned the teacup once more in his hands. The room was silent, every breath held in anticipation of his next words. Slowly, with deliberate precision, He pointed to the crack in the porcelain, a small, faint fracture that had long since been repaired. "This, mes amis," he began, his voice taking on a theatrical quality, "is the key to understanding everything." I leaned forward, unable to contain my curiosity. "The crack?" "Yes, Hastings, the crack," Poirot replied, tapping the edge of the teacup gently. "Look at it closely. The angle of the break, the force that caused it. It tells a story that no one else has seen. But Hercule Poirot, he notices what others miss." I glanced at the cup again, but I saw only an ordinary fracture, too small to hold such significance. "I'm afraid I don't see it, Poirot." Poirot smiled knowingly. "Ah, but you do not observe. Look carefully, mon ami. The break, she is angled, not straight, but curved, as though the cup were turned in a certain way when it fell." I frowned. "Are you saying the cup fell at an angle?" "Non, non. The cup did not fall by accident. It was dropped, deliberately. And the angle of the break tells me this. It was dropped by someone who is left-handed." A hush fell over the room as Poirot's words sank in. "But who, Poirot? Who is left-handed?" I asked, though my suspicion was already growing. Poirot's gaze turned to Miss Prattle, whose face had turned several shades paler. "Mademoiselle Prattle, you are the only left-handed person among us, and I believe in your hurry you dropped the cup to conceal the poison within it." Miss Prattle's lips parted, but no words came. Poirot's voice softened, almost pitying. "You were so sure no one would see the truth. But it is always the smallest things, the smallest details, that betray the guilty." Lady Constance's eyes filled with tears, but Miss Prattle said nothing, her hands shaking in her lap. Poirot nodded. "The break in the cup, it was not an accident, it was a confession." As the weight of Poirot's revelation hung in the air, he continued without hesitation. "But there is more to the story, mes amis. The letters, these mysterious notes that threatened Lady Constance, they too have their own tale to tell." I turned to him, eager to hear his analysis. "You think the letters were connected to the murder?" "Oui, mon ami," Poirot replied with a small smile. "The letters, they were not just warnings. They were the work of someone who understood fear and how to exploit it." Poirot unfolded the letters one by one, placing them on the table for everyone to see. Each one of these was designed to play upon Lady Constance's superstition. The broken teacup, the mention of doom, it was all carefully crafted to make her believe the past was repeating itself. Lady Constance gasped, clutching her chest. "But I believed it. I thought it was the curse." Poirot's voice softened. "A curse, madame, is a convenient thing for a blackmailer, someone who knew of your fears and who sought to profit from them." He looked directly at Miss Prattle. "You wrote the letters, mademoiselle, to distract attention from your own guilt. You made Lady Constance believe that fate was at work, not a human hand." Miss Prattle's face crumbled. I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted him to love me. I never meant to hurt anyone." Poirot shook his head, his expression stern. "You did not intend the murder, no, but you allowed your emotions to cloud your judgment, and in the end, it was your jealousy that led to death." Poirot lifted the mismatched teacup once more, his fingers caressing its delicate curves with an almost reverent touch. "You see, mes amis, this cup. It was the final piece of the puzzle. The poison, the broken teacup, the letters, all of them led to this moment." He paused, turning to face the room with a slight smile. "The truth is now clear to all. It was Miss Prattle, in her jealous rage, who orchestrated the murder. She knew that by poisoning Lord Enderby's tea, she could remove him from Lady Constance's life once and for all. And when the teacup shattered, she believed the crime would remain hidden forever." Poirot's eyes sparkled with an almost imperceptible glint of satisfaction. "But no crime can be concealed forever, Hastings. The smallest detail always reveals the truth." I glanced around the room, noting the shocked expressions on the faces of the other suspects. Lady Constance, her hands trembling, seemed as though she had aged 10 years in the past few minutes. Reginald stared at Miss Prattle, his face twisted in disgust. Poirot's voice rang out, as calm and deliberate as ever. "Mon ami, remember this. It is not always the big things that lead us to the truth. It is the small, unnoticed details that tell the most." With that, Poirot stood, his gaze lingering on Miss Prattle, who could no longer meet his eyes. And now, justice is served. Miss Edith Prattle sat before us, her eyes red and swollen from hours of weeping. Her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, trembled with the weight of her guilt. She looked a mere shadow of the proud, reserved woman who had so recently denied any involvement in Lord Enderby's death. Poirot stood before her, his expression calm, almost serene. "Mademoiselle," he said softly, "the truth, it will come eventually. Better to speak it now than to carry it alone in silence." Miss Prattle's voice broke, and for a moment she was unable to speak. She swallowed, her hands gripping the edges of her chair, as if it were her only anchor in a world gone mad. "I did it," she whispered, almost too softly to hear. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes kind but intense. "You poisoned Lord Enderby." She nodded, her face crumpling as the tears began to fall again. "I never meant to kill him. I thought if I could just make him see me as I saw him, everything would be different." "But you were so sure that Lady Constance would stand in your way," Poirot said gently. "The jealousy, it clouded your mind." "Yes," she cried, her voice growing stronger. He was going to reconcile with her. He was going to go back to her, and I couldn't bear it. I loved him so much, and I thought that if I made him ill, if I just—" She broke off, her hands pressed to her mouth to stifle a sob. Poirot's expression softened, though his words remained steady. "Mademoiselle, it is love. Yes, that led you down this path. But it was twisted love, dangerous love, the kind that consumes instead of heals." Miss Prattle's face was wet with tears, but she nodded. "I didn't know what I was doing. It was all— I was so desperate." Poirot leaned back, nodding as if the pieces of a puzzle had finally clicked into place. "And in that desperation you poisoned Lord Enderby, knowing he would drink from the cup prepared for him." "I didn't want to hurt Lady Constance," she said, almost pleading. "I never wanted her to know. I thought if I could just get rid of him, I could have him for myself." Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. "And now, mademoiselle, you see how love can turn into poison, the very thing that destroys what it wishes to protect." Poirot gave Miss Prattle a moment to collect herself before turning his gaze to the rest of the room. He was as calm as ever, but there was a gravity in his tone that made it impossible to ignore. "Mon ami," he said, addressing Hastings without looking at him, "love, when it is pure, can lift the soul. But when twisted by jealousy and desire, it becomes the most dangerous poison of all." Hastings glanced from Poirot to Miss Prattle, then back to Poirot, still struggling to grasp the depth of the situation. But how could anyone go so far? Poirot gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. "It is simple, mon ami. The mind, it is fragile. When one is blinded by emotion, reason is lost. Miss Prattle thought she was acting out of love, but she was merely acting out of fear." He paused, letting his words settle. "And that fear, it led her to poison a man who was neither cruel nor wicked. He was simply a man who could not return her love." Poirot turned his attention back to the details of the case. "You see, Hastings, it was not just the teacup that held the key to this mystery. No. It was the entire sequence of events, carefully constructed by Miss Prattle." He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Let us consider the clues. First, the poison, the manner in which it was administered. It was a slow-acting poison, one that would take time to show its effects. But you see, Miss Prattle did not count on Lord Enderby's constitution. He was stronger than she thought, and it took longer for the poison to take its full effect. Then, Poirot continued, there was the teacup, a cup that had been deliberately moved, perhaps to ensure that it was the one Lord Enderby would drink from. And when the cup was broken, Miss Prattle thought she had destroyed all evidence of her crime. But what of the fingerprints? Hastings interjected. We know Miss Prattle's were on the sugar bowl. Poirot nodded. Ah, yes, that was another mistake. In her hurry, Miss Prattle adjusted the sugar bowl, thinking no one would notice the marks left behind. I frowned, piecing the details together. So she thought she could get away with it, that no one would connect the poisoned tea with her. Poirot smiled. Exactly, mon ami. She believed the accident of the broken teacup would be enough to cover her tracks. But what she failed to realize was that Hercule Poirot always notices the smallest details, and a single broken teacup does not erase the truth. Poirot's gaze shifted to the door, and for a moment I thought he was lost in thought. But then, in his usual deliberate manner, he spoke once more. And now, Hastings, you may wonder, how did I know the exact timing of the tea being served? How did I know that the teacup was the key to it all? I looked at him, curious but apprehensive. You've been telling us all along, Poirot, that the cup was the key. But what's this about the waiter? Poirot smiled, a mischievous gleam in his eye. Ah, my friend, you remember the waiter who dropped the teacup at Claridge's, the one who caused the initial stir? I nodded, recalling the incident vividly. Yes, but what does he have to do with all this? The waiter, Poirot said, was no mere servant. He was an actor, hired by me, you see, to stage a test of Lady Constance's reaction to the legend of the broken teacup. I stared at him, momentarily taken aback. You staged it? Oui, Poirot replied, his voice calm but firm. I needed to see how Lady Constance would respond to the idea of the teacup's curse. Would she be overwhelmed by fear? Or would she remain composed as one would expect of an intelligent woman? And the result? I asked, my curiosity piqued. Poirot's smile deepened. The result, mon ami, was that Lady Constance revealed far more than she realized. She was a woman caught between superstition and reason, yet she never once suspected the true danger was much closer to home. Just as I was about to speak, a low knock at the door interrupted our conversation. Poirot looked up, his eyes narrowing in sudden interest. A servant entered, carrying an envelope that had just arrived. A letter for you, Monsieur Poirot, the servant said, and placed it on the table. Poirot picked it up without haste, his expression unreadable. He unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the text swiftly. Another letter, he murmured, almost to himself. I leaned forward. What does it say, Poirot? Poirot's lips curled into a small smile, though his eyes remained sharp. It says nothing new, Hastings. It is simply a warning, another blackmailer hoping to exploit Lady Constance's fear. He placed the letter down carefully. But the real blackmailer, Hastings, has not yet been caught, the one who has been pulling the strings behind the scenes. A curious prospect, is it not? I blinked in surprise. You mean there's more to the story? Poirot's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with quiet amusement. Ah, mon ami, the mystery is never truly solved. There is always another thread to follow, another puzzle to unravel. As Poirot sipped his tea, his eyes twinkling with amusement, he gave me a final look that was both enigmatic and knowing. Tea, my dear Hastings, is rarely just tea. I stared at him, confused for a moment, and then realized his words were not merely a reflection on the case, but a reminder of the complexities of human nature. Nothing is ever as simple as it seems, and even the most innocuous details could hide the deepest secrets. And with that, Poirot leaned back in his chair, his mystery solved. Yet the door left ajar for a future story yet to be told. As Poirot neatly folded his napkin and placed it beside his cup, he turned to us all. his face calm and composed, as always. "Mon ami," Poirot said with a slight smile. "You see, the truth, it is like the smallest piece of a broken cup, so easily lost, so easily overlooked. But when we put the pieces back together, the full picture is revealed." His words hung in the air, and I couldn't help but reflect on the lessons Poirot had imparted. The answer to any mystery, no matter how complex, is always right in front of us. We just need to observe carefully, trust in our reasoning, and never overlook the seemingly insignificant details. Because in the end, nothing is ever truly hidden. Eventually, the truth always comes to light. As I glanced around at the room full of guilty faces, I couldn't help but offer a small chuckle. "I suppose we all have a little something we'd like to hide, Poirot, even if it's just a mismatched teacup." Poirot raised an eyebrow and smiled his knowing smile. "Ah, Hastings, if only it were that simple. But life, much like this mystery, has a way of showing us the truth when we least expect it. Now, dear viewers, what do you think was the biggest clue that finally exposed the true culprit? Was it the angle of the broken teacup? Or perhaps the cryptic letters? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on how Poirot unraveled this complex case. If you enjoyed this Hercule Poirot mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more thrilling detective stories to life every day. Stay tuned for more Poirot adventures. There's always another mystery just waiting to be solved. She was the one who poisoned Lady Clarissa, believing that killing her would stop the sale of the house and secure her future. But in the end, it was her fear that led to her undoing. I let out a sigh, marveling at the brilliance of Poirot's deductions. But the most brilliant part, Poirot, was the final twist, Lady Clarissa's will. Poirot's smile was thin and knowing. Ah, Hastings, the final twist was the real masterstroke. Lady Clarissa, in her wisdom, had already decided that the wealth would go to charity, leaving all of their efforts utterly pointless. The greed, the manipulation, the murder, all for nothing. I leaned back, still in awe. "Poirot, you've done it again." Poirot's eyes twinkled as he adjusted his tie. "I do not think of it as a game, mon ami, but rather as the uncovering of truth in the face of deception." As I sat beside Poirot, the fire crackling softly in the hearth, I couldn't help but reflect on the unfolding events. The complexity of human nature had never been more apparent, and yet, as always, Poirot's mind had cut through the labyrinth of lies with surgical precision. "Mon ami," Poirot began, his voice quiet but firm, "you must understand, the key to this entire case was not the letter, nor even the forged documents. No, it was the psychology of greed." I raised an eyebrow. "Greed?" I asked, slightly confused. "But they all seem to want different things." Poirot nodded, a small smile curling the corners of his mouth. "Ah, but that is precisely it. Each person in this story, from Agnes Lacey to Geoffrey Banks, even Mrs. Pringle, wanted something, you see. They believed that with the fortune, they could escape their own fears, their own limitations. But in the end, it was fear that drove them. Fear of losing what little they had, not the desire to gain anything more. I leaned back in my chair, intrigued. But the invention of Leopold Montague as an heir? Why would they go that far? Poirot's eyes twinkled with the satisfaction of explaining. Because Hastings, once the fortune was known, the idea of an heir seemed the only plausible excuse to hold on to it. The fortune was too great a temptation to ignore. By creating a nephew, they allowed themselves to believe that they could control the outcome, that they could control Lady Clarissa's wealth. "And the forgery?" I asked. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "A forgery is not just a physical act, Hastings. It is a psychological one. To forge is to create a lie that appears so convincing that even the victim does not recognize it as such. It is an act of self-deception as much as it is an attempt to deceive others." I nodded slowly, understanding. So, the fortune wasn't really the prize. It was the control they sought. Poirot smiled. Exactement, mon ami. The greatest deception was not the inheritance, but the belief that they could control their own fate. Poirot's gaze shifted to the fire, his fingers steepled together in that familiar, contemplative way. And now, Hastings, the final irony of it all. I looked up in confusion. What do you mean, Poirot? He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. Lady Clarissa's fortune, the fortune that caused so much greed, deceit, and death, was never worth anything at all. I stared at him. What do you mean? She was a wealthy woman. Her estate was enormous. Poirot's smile was both bitter and amused. Ah, but you see, my friend, she had invested everything she owned in a most unfortunate venture. An ostrich farm. I blinked in disbelief. An ostrich farm? But that's absurd. Indeed, Poirot said, his eyes glinting with the quiet satisfaction of a perfect conclusion. Lady Clarissa, in her eccentricity, had poured her money into an ill-fated ostrich farm venture, thinking it would bring her great fortune. It had, in fact, brought her only loss. Her wealth, as it turned out, was worthless. Then, I began, but Poirot cut me off with a nod. Nothing was left. The fortune they fought for, murdered for, was a fantasy, Hastings. All of their scheming, their manipulation, their fear, it was for nothing. I could only stare, stunned by the final twist. Nothing was left to inherit. As the fire in the hearth crackled softly, the room fell into a reflective silence. The suspects, now arrested, were no longer the focus of Poirot's mind. Instead, his attention turned inward, contemplating the lesson that had emerged from all the deception and fear. Poirot's voice was calm, almost soothing as he spoke. Mon ami, the greatest mystery of all is not the crime itself, but the human heart. Greed, fear, and ambition drive us to unimaginable lengths. But in the end, truth always reveals itself, no matter how carefully it is hidden. He paused, his eyes briefly meeting mine. You see, Hastings, it was never about the fortune. The true treasure was the truth that came to light, however painfully. These criminals believed they could control their fate, but in the end they were trapped by their own fear. I nodded, still trying to digest the gravity of the situation. And yet, Poirot, despite all the scheming and lies, the real irony is that none of them had anything to gain. Poirot gave a soft smile, the faintest trace of sadness in his eyes. Exactly, my friend. The truth, in all its glory, is sometimes a cruel companion. As Poirot always says, the mind is a labyrinth. In this case, the mind of each suspect was a twisted maze, leading them down paths of deception. What do you think was the most significant clue that revealed Mrs. Pringle as the true murderer? Was it the letter, the forged signature, or perhaps something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this Hercule Poirot mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more thrilling detective stories to life every day. Stay tuned, because more Poirot mysteries are coming your way soon, filled with intrigue, cunning, and the brilliant deductions that only Hercule Poirot can deliver. Subscribe now and join us as we continue to unravel the most perplexing cases, one clue at a time. Until next time, mon ami.